Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Mark Schillinger, founder of the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend. It's a rite of passage initiation adventure camp for young men ages 13 to 20 that helps them get better prepared for the challenges of the young adult world. And I'm also the founder of Challenging Teenage Sons, an organization devoted to helping parents and their teen sons have more caring and cooperative relationships. Today's podcast is called, Is Your Son Struggling with Self-Doubt? Last week, I saw a young man who I've been mentoring for about 4 months. He's 16 years old, does just good enough in high school, plays as a backup on his sports team, baseball, and mostly likes being with his friends. And in the last few months, he's become disrespectful to his parents and he's not really contributing around the house. And like lots of parents I mentor, they're starting to see their son as being lazy and indifferent, irresponsible, and basically just too distracted by his devices and by his friends. And I'm sure this sounds a lot like what some of you have gone through with your teen son at some point. I certainly did with my son Gabe back in the 1990s. So the first thing I tell parents is that their son still has the right biological drive to become more independent, happy, and productive. He's definitely not broken. However, I let them know that their son may be living a secret life where he doesn't feel like he has what it takes to make it in the world. Your son may have lots of self-doubt and a lack of self-confidence. Or like this young man that I'm telling you about, he wants to believe that he has what it takes to make it in the world, which is, by the way, a great sign that he still has his biological drive to get out into the world. And he also knows that he doesn't know how to get out there and do it right. When I first met this young man, he didn't know how to resolve this dilemma of wanting to become more responsible for himself and also feeling bad about not knowing how to do it. And it made him frustrated and angry lots of the time. And that's what he was acting out with his parents in his house, basically. His only reprieve from his inner conflict was when he was having fun. So unless he was having fun, he was slowly withdrawing from his inner conflict by not actively seeking how to fulfill his true potential. Simply put, he just didn't think he could do it. So the way that I got him to trust me and to let me be his mentor was because I praised him for trying to articulate what his inner conflict was. He did a good job, not perfect, but I knew what he was saying, even though he didn't think he was doing it exactly well. And he did tell me that he appreciated my interpretation. He couldn't say it exactly the way I did. And that contributed to his sense of self-doubt, which he later owned. When I told him that my role as a mentor was to help him understand himself better and to help him get to where he wants to go, he sheepishly agreed to let me help him. I slowly stuck out my hand to shake his hand. I wanted to see what he was going to do. Well, he very tentatively, and then he also had some certainty, reached out his arm and hand to my hand and shook it. What I heard him silently say to me was that he knew he needed guidance. It was actually pretty sweet. Basically, what I do when I mentor young men is to make them what I call the deal, which you may have heard me talk about in other podcasts. Here's what the deal is. I tell young men that I'm going to help them discover their authentic, true, unique, genuine virtues and values and skills that they were born with so that they can be true to themselves. In other words, to be authentic. I let them know that by being true to themselves, they don't necessarily need to seek happiness from their devices or from their friends, but to simply access their own inner wisdom that they were born with, which they enjoy hearing. And I tell them that I'm going to help them discover the virtues, values, and skills that they're going to need to acquire, meaning the ones that they weren't born with, so that they can confidently conform to the challenges of the adult world. And then I boil it down to 2 words, authenticity and conformity. I tell them that this is not a dilemma to try to combine authenticity and conformity. I let them know that if they can accept this as a both and reality, both And they can do well in the world, meaning they need to both know how to discover who they are and to know who they need to become by developing certain skills that they weren't born with. I've only had a few young men over the past 25 years tell me that they're not interested in taking the deal. And then when I don't make a big fuss over it, and I tell them that they'll be responsible for whatever consequence comes by them for not making the deal, I know they hear me. Listen, I can't force them to work with me, and I can plant a seed by telling them that they can't blame anybody else for their lack of effort for becoming the man they always wanted to be. And I don't say that with shame or guilt or blame. I'm just telling them straight up, I'm a mentor. I'm not going to sugarcoat. Now, we'll talk more about these two virtues of authenticity and conformity in a few minutes. So back to my story with this young guy that I'm mentoring. We had just finished a whole executive functioning section on time management, like how to create to-do lists with priorities, how to use calendars, how to set up his schedule, things like that. And a result of getting good at this, he told me he noticed his parents aren't using as many consequences with him because he's actually remembering to do the things they're asking him to do. And he's remembering to do the things he knows he needs to do, like his chores and homework, things like that. And as a result, his confidence in himself is going way up, which he was really happy to tell me, which was really cool to hear. He said his parents used to have to constantly remind him and nag him to do the things they asked of him, but he'd only forget. Then there'd be consequences for forgetting. And this definitely fueled his already low self-confidence, which of course he would never tell his parents about. So just by instilling a few simple things into his habits, we were able to help him feel more prepared for life after high school. Now, this is really huge to help young men overcome their self-doubt because the research clearly shows that young men who have low self-esteem are more likely to do poorly in school, develop anxiety or depression, or engage in behaviors that become detrimental to their health and their well-being, and the well-being of others for that matter. And I've said to you in other podcasts, young men know when they doubt their desire or ability to handle adult challenges. The problem is they probably won't ever tell you this. They don't even have the confidence to communicate with you, their parent. Instead, they'll retreat into addictive behaviors like playing video games or streaming media, being on social media, things like that. However, I found that young men will tell me their worries about self-confidence when I mentor them. I think there's some kind of safety they feel knowing that I'm on their side and I'm not a direct family member and I'm not going to tell their parents what they tell me. So, if you're worried your son is retreating too deeply into video games, not pursuing his passions, not recovering from some emotional trauma, becoming too focused on just hanging out with his friends, or simply lacks the confidence to create the life you know he can have, this podcast today will highlight some of the reasons why he's becoming more withdrawn from you and not engaging life more fully. And of course, I'll be highlighting some of the solutions that help young men regain their confidence in their abilities to adapt to the challenges of the adult world. After mentoring young men for 25 years, both at the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend Rite of Passage and privately here in my office or on Zoom, here's what I know. Young men who see themselves as stupid or slow or socially awkward begin to withdraw from the important challenges that they need to experience in order to learn how to handle adult life. When these young men see themselves as inadequate or overwhelmed by life, they will seek behaviors that offer temporary relief from their pain. And as they continue to withdraw, their sense of self-worth declines. The negative feedback loop that continually causes young men not to be happy with themselves, which will definitely lead to anxiety and probably even depression. I personally know this is true because I went through these things when I was a teenager myself. And now looking back at 71 years of age, I also know that because I had great mentors, supportive parents, great siblings, and a lot of determination to, quote unquote, figure myself out, I'm at peace with myself now. I know this is a profound blessing to have this, to be able to say this. I want this for your son as well, and I know that you do too. So let's get into it. Let's talk about some solutions to the issue of your son feeling self-doubt and not having enough confidence in himself. Number one, young men must know how to regulate their feelings of agitation, frustration, and anger. Boom. I mean, that's the very first thing I tell them. I'm going to say that again. Young men must know how to regulate their feelings of agitation, frustration, and anger. And that's the first thing I'm telling you right now. I let the young men know that if they can't relax to their own emotions that they're experiencing in the moment they're in, it's unlikely they'll overcome self-doubt. I don't pull any punches. I'm not angry when I say it. I'm a mentor. I'm cool and calm and collected. And I'm not going to sugarcoat them. I can do that while I'm being compassionate and caring at the same time. So the very first skill that I teach young men, just like your son, to overcome self-doubt and increase his confidence is to learn how to relax to their own negative thoughts and feelings and behaviors. First, that's the first thing I help young men who are plagued with self-doubt understand. I let them know that when the feeling of self-doubt arises, they need to be able to recognize it and then do a very simple and very powerful mindfulness-based mind calming technique that allows them to relax their mind and their body in 15 seconds or less. The technique that I show them is so easy to do, and after a few months, they can become really masterful at that. There have been numerous times when young men that I mentor tell me that they no longer say or do things when they're in that reaction mode. They tell me that by controlling their breath and their mind, right in the moment, allows them to say and do the right thing. And mostly they tell me how it keeps them out of trouble and in the good graces of their teachers and their parents and their friends. They understand that it's okay to have a reaction and to even trust the wisdom in it, but not to have to act on it. Then they can translate that reaction into a mature, clear, concise response to whatever or whoever is stressing them out. So, in summary, learning to remain calm is the first step for a young man to overcome self-doubt and increase his confidence. Number two, young men need to know how to overcome the emotional issues that cause their immature behavior. Now, this is a heavy topic. I could spend hours talking about emotional issues that young people have. So I'm just going to say this really pretty briefly here, starting with the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend. At this Young Men's Ultimate Weekend Rite of Passage initiation that I founded years ago, we have an event where the young men release their pent-up emotional pain and frustration. It's really physical, and it's very cathartic. I won't go into the details here because I've done that on another podcast. But please trust me when I say that after the young men and the adult men, the volunteers, release their emotional pain and trauma in an intense tribal way, they all look way more relaxed and relieved. And as some of you know, our work was featured on the show This Is Life with Lisa Ling a few years ago, and she watched that. She was right there. It was really up close and personal, and she cried. And afterwards, when we had a big celebration with all the men, she was amazed at how they looked different. Like I'm saying, they just looked and acted different. It's very profound. So, short of getting your son to the YMW, get your son to somebody who knows how to specifically work with young men on how to do this type of work. This does not mean that you're a failure as a parent because you can't do this. For tens of thousands of years, I believe, tribes raised their children collectively. At some point, the parents knew that it was time for their children to take in more input from other tribal members who shared their same values. One of the things they did was trusted the community by putting their sons through a healthy rite of passage, which allowed them to return to the village free from their trauma, or certainly less traumatized, enough so that they could take better care of themselves, their family, and their tribe. We now live in an era where young men are getting their input from social media, and therefore they're not exposed to the best people and ideas about dealing with self-doubt. In fact, they often go to the extreme and just think that they're never going to recover from their emotional traumas or self-doubt. We need to get back to this tradition of having rites of passage and mentors in the community who can help young men grieve through their pain. Now, when I work with young men privately, I use a technique called taking off the mask. It was created by Ashanti Branch, a longtime YMUW, Young Men's Ultimate Weekend mentor. Ashanti is a close friend of mine, and he is known worldwide for this technique. You can look him up on the internet. Taking off the mask, Ashanti Branch. Essentially, when I work with young men, it involves me making it really safe for him to take off all the masks that he wears to prevent the world from seeing him in his uncomfortable state. As a young man starts to open up about what's really bothering him, and he sees that I'm not interrupting, I'm not blaming, I'm not shaming, I'm just sitting there listening and encouraging him to say more. Well, it doesn't take long before he starts to get into tears and starts looking down when he's trying to speak because he's uncomfortable. I just stay quiet or encourage him or tell him he's doing a great job. And then he goes deeper into the grieving and he'll start to cry. He'll tell me about his pain, and eventually it'll lead to something about self-doubt or lack of confidence in himself. I mean, he'll always go for it when he's on that roll. Ultimately, what I've learned is that young men will reveal why they have so much self-doubt and lack of confidence in themselves when the conditions are just right. And when the self-doubt is from an emotional wound, I make it clear to them that they can do what humans have done for tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. And that's to be able to grieve and to simultaneously move on with their life and choose to move in the right direction. Both can be true. This is a key point that young men need to hear. They need to grieve and they need to move on. They need to hear that they can feel the hard emotions and they can keep moving in the right direction. Always helps them when I tell them that humans have known this for thousands and thousands of years and have evolved this skill. One last thing about emotional trauma, then we'll get on to solution number 3. I let them know that they don't have to wait until they're perfectly cured from their grief, because if they do that, they're going to be waiting a very long time. And therefore, they will not evolve into the man they want to be. When I explain to them that it's natural to grieve so that they can move on, I can see a light goes on in their brain. It just lets them know that they're not wrong or bad for holding on to their grief. They just didn't know that grieving is a natural way for humans to begin the process of moving on. And by doing so, the more they can touch the pain of their emotion, the likelier they will move on from the pain of their emotion. In our work at the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, we want them to create a scar over their emotional trauma, not by ignoring it, but by going all the way through it. We want to close the wound. And we let them know that this is going to allow their body and their mind to continue the healing as they move on. Solution number 3, to help your son overcome self-doubt. As I said a few minutes ago, one of the solutions is to help them discover their own authenticity, their own values, their own virtues, their own behaviors that they were born with. Now, these are techniques that life coaches like me have been using for decades to accomplish. In fact, these kinds of techniques have probably been around for tens of thousands of years, certainly thousands, no doubt. It's not a secret on how to do this. I'm working with a young man right now who just finished filling out a chart that we've been working on that helps him reveal his innate virtues and values and the behaviors that demonstrate them. Oh, by the way, I define a virtue as a one-word quality like compassion, connection, discipline, or responsibility. And I define a value as a one-word sentence that clearly defines the virtue. Here's an example. Responsibility. That's a one-word virtue. I would define it or give it the value as doing things you like to do and don't like to do until completion. When a behavior is in alignment with a virtue and a value, then somebody's acting with integrity. They're lined up. They're good with themselves. And when somebody acts with integrity consistently, they start to develop positive beliefs about themselves. It allows young men to start having more respectful thoughts about themselves. And that's how they become more self-confident. I've seen this for 25 years. And I'm telling you, any life coach would tell you that this is what happens. So this is the model that I use when I mentor young men to discover their authentic self. And they become happy people when somebody helps them see themselves and understand why they're really great at some things and not so great at other things. They stop feeling bad for themselves because they know that they weren't born with all the specific knowledge and skills they need to accomplish their life goals. When young men express the virtues that they were born with creatively, it allows them to leverage their natural strengths. That's what they feel like. Feel like Superman. And that contributes to their sense of confidence, of course, authenticity. I've watched so many young men become so much more comfortable and at ease with themselves when they know this formula. Oh, and for you parents, you should know that your son would become way more productive when he's operating from a place of inner motivation, because now he's aligned with his own core virtues and values. Solution number 4. Again, as I mentioned earlier, another step in helping young men to overcome self-doubt is to help them develop the healthy virtues, values, and behaviors that they need to acquire, meaning the ones that they were not born with, so that they can better adapt to the world's demands. When I work with parents, I help them pick. Usually it's about 5 or 6 virtues that they know their son needs to acquire in order to adapt to the challenges of the world. By the way, after 25 years of working with so many parents, here's the most common ones that parents choose. Responsibility, for sure. Accountability, curiosity, remorse, discipline, and safety. I would say those are the top 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 virtues. And then I have the parents define them in a way that will let their son know in one sentence what they're talking about. And then they outline the behaviors that'll demonstrate those virtues and values, so their son knows. Using a method like this, parents can mentor their son in a coherent, organized way. There's no long lectures. This is way better than trying to teach your son how to make in the world when you're scared or frustrated that he's not going to make it out there. And believe me, your son picks up on that energy, which just contributes to his own self-doubt. And then we wonder why, as parents, that our sons are not listening to our wisdom. It's because you need to be calm. You need to be clear. You need to be compassionate. You need to be concise, communicating the virtues, values, and behaviors that you picked out. And yes, of course, there's consequences if they don't do them. That's a whole nother podcast that I've done somewhere in the past and have written a lot of literature about. By the way, when you explain to your son that he's not stupid or slow, he just simply needs to hear that no man is born with all the virtues, values, and behaviors or skills that he needs to have to become the man he wants to be. In fact, no human is. They need to hear that. So if you help your son cultivate the virtues he needs to acquire, he'll expand his capacity to handle challenges and adapt to new situations. This type of personal growth will enhance his productivity because he'll have more self-confidence in himself to get things done that he doesn't like to do. Number 5. Another way to have your son overcome self-doubt and increase confidence is by having people who can teach him executive functioning skills. When I start teaching young men executive functioning skills, especially when they're really young, like 13, it's so amazing to see them when they're 18 and getting ready to go off to college or get a job. They got their shit together. I mean, they just do, and they know it, and it's cool. They're not arrogant. They're humble. They get it. They know how to communicate. They know how to manage their time. They know how to be thoughtful in their decision-making, and they trust themselves. And here's the best part. When they don't trust themselves, when they don't know what to do, they know that they're still a stud when they ask others for help. All right, one last tip as a way to help your son overcome self-doubt. As some of you know from listening to my other podcasts, for a number of years, I taught a continuing education course for doctors and other health professionals in the brain science of stress management. So I'm letting you know that because the brain science is called neuroplasticity and epigenetics tell us that humans can change their mind about how they think and feel about themselves. I've been blessed to study with two of the great leaders in these new fields of science, Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza. These scientists tell us that when we consistently generate positive self-talk and intensely focus on the kind of person we want to be, we will eventually morph or evolve into that person. So, I teach young men how to do that. I always want to let them know that they need to develop the ability to positively talk to themselves. So I teach them this very simple and powerful 4-step process to generate better self-talk and see themselves as the people they want to be in the future. Here's step number 1. I begin with a challenging statement to them. I tell them that whoever they want to become is already existing inside of them. I tell them that whoever they want to become is already existing inside of them in a potential state that has not yet manifested. In a sense, they are already the man they want to become. Number 2, then I have them start focusing on the present moment by using a simple mindfulness-based stress management technique that gets them right in the present moment in just a few seconds, as I mentioned before. This way, they're not thinking about anything else other than being right here, right now. Step 3, I ask them to start visualizing themselves being confident human beings who respect themselves. In other words, hold themselves in a high regard for the values and skills they were born with and for the ones that they acquired. I encourage them to go really deep into this visualization, and I prompt them by asking them challenging questions like, what kind of clothes would you be wearing? What kind of people would you be hanging out with? What kind of activities would you be doing? What would it look like to not have to defend yourself or not to have to offend others because you trust yourself? What does that person look like? What do you see yourself doing? Step 4. Then I encourage them to go into a deep emotional state by responding to a couple of these challenging questions like, what will it feel like when you become who you already are? How will you feel about yourself when you do morph or evolve into this person? How will you feel? Mentally, emotionally, physically? What would it feel like? And I allow for a lot of time for them to contemplate, which for a young man in this year is like 30 seconds. After I leave this exercise, as I said, I allow for some silence, but I also always have some quiet music playing in the background, really quiet, very mellow when we go through this process. And after about those 30 seconds are up, I ask a very gentle question. What's happening for you now in this moment and in this moment only, like right now? I give them a few seconds of space to ponder the question, and then I ask them to speak up. If I'm in a group, somebody will speak up. If it's private, eventually the young man will say something. Almost every time, a young man will say something way more positive about themselves and way more positive about who they can become. And without exception, basically, I always hear them say that they feel more relaxed, if nothing else. I end the process by having them come up with a one sentence or simple phrase that best capsulizes their experience that they just had so that they can say this mantra over and over and over again by repeating it over and over and over again throughout their adult life. When they can say this mantra repeatedly throughout their whole life, starting right now, it will help them remember who they already are. Now, if one of the young men gets stuck and can't, create a mantra that I suggest, that they do, I give them one. Something like this. I already am who I want to become, or I already am who I will become. Something really simple. Now listen, you should know, I'm a brain scientist of stress management. Here's what I know about brain science, which has been known for thousands of years. The more you repeat something, the more you become that thing. Straight up. The more you repeat something, the more you become that thing. So I always encourage the young men to repeat this mantra throughout their whole life and never forget it. Here's what I've learned about young men who enter their journey of personal growth and self-evolution with people who support them properly. They open up. They open wide up. They become more helpful to others because they're now helping themselves. They tend to cooperate more. They definitely tend to communicate better. And they definitely become more productive. It's a beautiful thing to watch. So in closing, here's what I'd like to say to you. I encourage all of you parents to start supporting your son to overcome his lack of self-confidence by surrounding him with people who know how to draw out of him who he really is and who know how to help him become more skillful at what he needs to develop. By supporting him to become authentic and by mentoring him to conform to the demands of the world in a good way, your son will be on his way to becoming the man you know he can be and he knows he needs to be. It's a beautiful thing to watch. If you want to stop subscribing to my free weekly blog, send an email to info@challengingteenagesons.com and we'll add your name to our list of subscribers. If you want to speak to me directly, again, send an email to info@challengingteenagesons.com. I will personally respond to your inquiry or your comments. By the way, challenging teenage sons doesn't mean that young men are challenging. No way. You know why? Because young men tell me the parents are the ones who are challenging. No, challenging teenage sons means as a society, as a culture, we have forgotten how to challenge our sons to become the great men we know they already are. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast.